All right. So we are gonna get started. I'm gonna just go ahead and leave the door open in case people want to wander in. And I just thought I would start by introducing Amy and then just giving the prompt that we use.
Okay,
so
cool.
We'll kind of know. So this is Amy Gooch, and she is here applying for the Collegiate Recovery Community Coordinator position. And we provided a prompt for a presentation. It's very broad. It said, could you please create a presentation addressing the components, why collegiate recovery communities are important, and what Amy's approach is to supporting students in recovery. So we have about 30 minutes for a presentation. We'll have about 15 minutes for Q&A after.
Sweet. Presentation time. I was telling Amy and Sarah earlier that I don't think I've ever given a formal presentation. So usually at the beginning I'm like, this will be really informal. So I think like you can stop me and ask questions. We will have questions at the end, like Amy just said. And I'm gonna keep saying Amy. Hopefully I'm usually referring to Amy and not referring to myself in the third person. So yeah, this will be informal. Ask me questions. Sarah thought it was cool that I used Canva. So hopefully it's kind of like easy-ish for people to like see, and I tried to make the font pretty big. So here's the title slide. Thank you to OSU Marketing for putting like the Pantone like codes and stuff. It was very easy to find. We're rocking the orange. Cool. So this is actually Fort Collins, but I thought it was very scenic and lovely. So this is just kind of like an overview of what I'll be talking about. So I thought it might be cumbersome to talk about myself at the beginning, so I'm going to wait till the end to talk about me. And in the beginning I'll address the two questions, like why are CRPs important? What are my approaches to supporting students in recovery? I'll try to make kind of connections between the Health Network's biennial review and Oregon State's strategic plan, and then talk about my purpose, and then questions at the end. Are you okay, Sarah? I just yawned like 100 times. So now I'm looking at you and I'm like, is Sarah yawning? Because I was like, I promise I'm not bored. I think I'm just cold.
You're not bored.
Okay, cool. So my mom, who always has such sage advice, was like, don't cuss during your interview. So this is me not cussing. But I did put a little graphic on the slide that says ass. And so this is actually from Young People in Recovery's Instagram. So if you're interested in like really cool social media campaigns that are very like kind of recovery oriented, and they also emphasize like different paths and phases. So yeah, YPR is amazing. I digress. So the quote at the top is this dude. The name of the book, I'm gonna be kind of all over the place, and I'll try to make good eye contact too. So he wrote a book called Chasing the Scream, which is kind of like a critique of the war on drugs, and it also kind of emphasizes like the opposite of like the moral sort of like deficit model of addiction, and kind of talks about like the emphasizes a lot about like social support and how like having a solid support network is like so important to recovery, and that's kind of what I will talk about in the context of why CRPs and like what my approach will be. Institutional readiness is what bullet point number 1 says. And so something that CSU asks themselves really often, which I really appreciate, is not sort of like what does a student being ready look like, but what does the institution being ready look like in regards to how students are matriculating, what retention looks like, and how we can make sure that the students enrolling are successful. And so kind of like in the context of collegiate recovery, I think like institutional readiness is sort of like, again, what a part of what should be at the foundation of what the community is going to do. So there, I'm going to go one slide over for this like very long quote. So in the brief interview before this, I mentioned a lot, or I mentioned a few times, there's a literature review that there's a new journal called Recovery Science Journal, which is kind of like started by a bunch of the OGs in collegiate recovery. And so it's like an open source journal, and the first thing that they published was a literature review of like what research exists about CRPs. Spoiler, there's not a lot. And so this particular kind of like quote or concept spoke to me. I don't know if everyone wants to read it. It would be a little cumbersome if I read it out loud. But what they mentioned in the literature review is that this Woodford dude did a phenomenological study on folks in recovery, or specifically students in recovery, and what he sort of realized is that not unlike invisible identities that are present throughout the institution, recovery can also be kind of qualified as an invisible identity, that these students are underserved, and like we need to do some stuff to make sure that those students are able to be successful and have the supports that they need. Does that make sense? Thanks, Woodford. All right. So another piece that, again, we kind of addressed a little bit earlier in the other questions is like students in recovery are an asset to campuses, which I think kind of goes against, again, like the moral deficit model, kind of against the like, kind of, it's not a resources lost or asset loss, it's like, it's a gain, it's a benefit to have students in recovery on your campus and to be supporting them. So another sort of like work of scholarship that I cited is from 1994, and in the literature review, the sort of findings that they listed are students in recovery are passionate about proving themselves. Students in recovery have a more developed sense of self than high-achieving rule followers. Students in recovery are motivated by past failures and can function as effective on-campus leaders. So I just wanted to like cite those couple of things. And I'm currently a residence director, and so I mentioned earlier too, I'm gonna keep saying that, that like I know a lot of student leaders who are just like, I'm here to lead, but they don't necessarily, like they can't really explain more beyond that. And so when I think about student leadership opportunities for folks that have reached sort of a different level of self-actualization, I think those students, yeah, are an asset to campus and to the CRC, CRP. Does that make sense? Cool. There's, I should have put it on here, but there's, Young People in Recovery has an infographic of what a recovery-ready community looks like. It's something that I've said even since I was like a baby student affairs professional, which sometimes I look back on that and I'm like, I was so full of it. And some of it also like really applies to now. So when I think about institutions of higher education, it's like what a cool sort of pilot opportunity for what like a larger community and then sort of like the world can look like. And so the different pieces of the recovery-ready community are prevention, treatment, harm reduction, judicial and law enforcement, housing, education, employment, and recovery support. So when I think about what sort of like a holistic CRC, CRP could look like, it would sort of have connections with whatever campus stakeholders these things would provide. Does that make sense? Cool. And then one of my favorite definitions of recovery is a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness and live self-directed lives and strive to reach their full potential. So when I think about that definition of recovery, I also think like that's kind of what higher education wants to do too, whether that's like in the classroom or out of the classroom. It's like how can we empower and provide a space for students to like reach their full potential. So yeah, I just felt like a very happy sort of synthesis between like what really cool recovery looks like and what a really cool college experience should try to do. Sweet. Different stuff. Another very texty slide. So I think I'm kind of moving through, I just explained the why, and then I'll kind of get to the how, but I talked a little bit about the professional organization or the, I just learned the word consortium, and so I like to use it now, and like this is the only space where it's appropriate. There are 7 criteria for for a collegiate recovery community, and like some institutions have them all, some are like working with just a few, and so these are under like the standards and recommendations from the Association of Recovery in Higher Education. And so I'm excited by these because it's like a very helpful tool for like stakeholder negotiations, and I'm thinking about like RAVE Recovery, which is the collegiate recovery organization group that I work with at CSU. We were able to use these to like have a stakeholder meeting with like a dean to kind of say like, this is what the professional organization says we need, here's what we have, here's what we like, or what our vision will hopefully be. So another reason I wanted to address these is because I hope they change a little bit, and not in a significant way, but I think although this is a good place to start, I'm also excited to like see what other students we can serve and like how we can serve them better. So specifically, number one is talking about embracing abstinence. That's a cool place to start, and also like, can we have nuanced conversations about like moderation management, or if students are abstaining from one substance but not another, and so like not limiting recovery communities just to the abstinence-based model. And so it's not as easy as I'm making it sound. I feel like it's just like, let's serve more people, but I think like, what would it mean for a community to like have like restrictions on sort of who is able to be involved, and then what would it look like for students that are in different spots to still be able to like support each other and have the environment and the community be working. Not as easy as I'm making it sound. So number 4 talks about, this is not something that I think is like open for debate, even though when I read it you'll be like, oh Amy, that's strange. So it says CRPs have a paid, qualified, trained, ethical, and dedicated professionals who support students in recovery. So the thing I'm kind of like thinking about with this, I come from a student affairs background, which is very like student development, community building focused. And something that's like a frequently asked question on ARAG is like, who's qualified to be like a professional in collegiate recovery? And it basically says like, we don't know, like it's still kind of happening. And so something I'm interested in terms of this sort of question or criteria is like, is it more valuable to have like a clinician sort of running a community, or is it more valuable to have like a student affairs focused person? And like, could it be both? What would that look like? So I think this is something that we can kind of like start to retool or be more critical about. Number 5 talks about like a variety of recovery support services, which again kind of connects to like AA and NA are a great place to start. A lot of the like longest running, more successful CRPs, like that is their shit. And so like, can we broaden that? And I think what's cool about it is like this community has like refuge recovery, and we're doing mindfulness stuff, and AA and NA additionally, so I think this is like a really solid start. And can we make sure that we're knowledgeable about like the paths and phases that exist, so if students come into the community and we don't have a meeting that like fits what they're looking for, can we start that? Or can we be like, if that's what you want, let me help you facilitate that. We'll put a meeting on the agenda or on the schedule, and like, it'll happen. So that's very exciting. For number 6, again, with the focus on like drug and alcohol stuff, I'm wondering like process addictions and other like disordered eating and things like that, are there also ways to like fold those particular folks into this, and like how could we do that responsibly, is something else that I hope the field kind of considers in the future. And I just wanted to name that I'm so excited that OSU has like housing in a space, because I think that makes the opportunities for programs and support like very different and really cool. So I put like, so happy, and then a smiley face by it. Cool. Any questions about that part? Cool. Yeah. So this is kind of going more towards the like, how are you gonna do it? Something that I will continue to harp on, because I just think it's so important, is like the being open to different paths and phases. So something that I noticed in the about, in terms of like the current iteration of what the community looks like, is it's open to folks in recovery or seeking recovery. And so I'll talk a little bit more later about how powerful it is to see students moving through their higher education experience without using drugs or alcohol. So it's important to me that like if folks are just starting out, or they just want to like see that this population exists, that it's like open and available to them. something that is very important in terms of like the values of the institution and kind of like what higher education has always looked like is we need to be able to serve a different population other than like cis, white, male, all the dominant identities. Like how can we set up a community and have conversations about what this service will look like in the framework of like prioritizing inclusion. Sorry, I have a lot of notes on this part. Something I wanted to talk about for the validation theory piece, the theorist or scholar behind this, her name is Laura Rendon, and the academic thing that she wrote was also in 1994, and it talks about how like the student profile changed a lot between like 1900 and like the end of the 1900s. And so a quote from the article, she says, this, meaning like the changing of the population, has resulted not only in the colorization of the academy, but in the proliferation of a constellation of students that challenge traditional values, assumptions, and conventions, which have long been entrenched in the academy. So something she talks about, like, in addition to this, or kind of like how to, change how we think about the students that we're serving, is prioritizing students as like contributors to knowledge. And I talked a little bit about like co-creation and co-authorship, about like I don't see myself as like the knower of all of the things and the maker of this community, but rather like how can I facilitate like the learning and the needs of the students that are coming into the community. Knowledge contribution is something that it talks about, as well as like just having a support network. So I think this looks like having students that you can see that are recovered, that are like kicking ass, and then being like, how did you do that? Let's talk about it. And also like erasing doubts for students in recovery. And so like one of the things that it says on the website too is like, sometimes higher education seems like something that has not been attainable for these folks. And so saying like, hi, you're here, let's do this, like I know you can, in whatever way that looks like, telling them like, you can do it, which seems really corny, but it's like powerful to say, you're here for a reason, we're gonna do this, let's go. Cool. Something else I wanted to talk about is the concept of recovery capital, which I think I couldn't find like a really tasty definition of it, but I think it's kind of connected to like the social and cultural sort of capital concepts, and so it's like, who you know is important, like what you've learned, or like your socialization matters and things like that. So when I think about recovery capital, I think about like social support, like the sort of spiritual practice and like growth around your recovery. And then I talked about like meeting attendance and pathway adherence. So I think having a system sort of around your recovery helps it be sustainable. And so when I think about membership to a CRC, CRP, or like a leadership role, that is part of your recovery capital, or part of how students will be able to like maintain their sobriety or whatever their recovery looks like. Cool. And then I also wanted to talk about collaboration and like asset mapping. And so something that we've talked about a lot, we being, I guess, like people that I interact with sort of like in the field of pleasure recovery, is like kind of trying to control the amount of redundancy, and also kind of understanding the scope that we have or don't have. So we had a good conversation earlier about like, in the event that students like maybe are not able to be successful at OSU in the moment, how can we make really cool and like informed referrals in terms of like where they're at, what they're going to need, and kind of make a plan for them to come back. And so sort of understanding like how the entities on campus that support students can be connected and like in the loop with each other, and additionally how resources outside of OSU can kind of be our people. Does that make sense? I made this thing on Canva too, and then framed it because I just thought it was cute. So Getting Curious is Jonathan Van Ness's podcast, and he did an interview with a dude who like made up his own, that sounds, he's a doctor, he has like certificates and stuff, but he wrote a book called The Abstinence Myth, and it's about how like sometimes like abstinence is not the easiest way to go, or it's kind of, even though it's sort of the accepted path, it feels like unattainable, and so like what would it look like to kind of start to like cut back, or yeah, again, do the moderation piece. And something that Dr. Jaffe talked about is like a lot of the clients that he worked with, they didn't start with abstinence right away, but once they start to like not engage with whatever destructive sort of like substance that was in their life, they eventually arrived at like, this is not working for me and I don't need to use anymore. So I think I think that's a good example of like different pathways, and sort of, yeah, arriving at the same conclusion, which is that like I need to abstain from this substance, but not necessarily in the harshest of ways. So yeah, that's what Jonathan Van Ness said. I think he was talking about his marijuana use and how like he sort of experimented with like, at one point he was using really heavily, then he was like completely not smoking at all, and then he kind of was able to get more selective about like when his use felt appropriate or not. Does that make sense? So I love a good harm reduction moment. I wanted to kind of connect what I perceive to be kind of like the place of the CRC, CRP in like the larger goals of the institution. And so excellence and impact was the name of the strategic plan. So I pulled a few sort of like bullet points from that document. And so in the strategic plan, it asserted we will be welcoming and foster belonging and success for all. And that really spoke to me in terms of like, that includes folks in recovery or people seeking recovery. And then I kind of struggle with the retention and graduation rates piece, only because like I'd mentioned, sometimes like for some students that are like in the middle of their substance use disorder, this might not be the place that they're gonna get better or the time that they're gonna decide to get better. And so when I think about retention with CRCs, we had like two folks in room recovery. One like left to do an internship, and another one went to study abroad. And I think they were both like really cool leaders within the community, and we were kind of like, wow, this is like, we're sad that they're not here anymore, but it was also like they made a huge impact while they were part of a community, and like, can they come back and contribute later? So I think it's important that we talk about retention in a nuanced way, not as like, our goal is to retain, even if that means maybe the student like, yeah, this isn't where they should be. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then I didn't know what a biennial review was until I was part of like a SAMHSA learning community about collegiate recovery, and something they talked about is like institutions to be in compliance with like the drug and alcohol free schools and campuses, like they have to create this document every other year where they kind of talk about like what are the resources on campus that exist for AOD education, prevention, intervention. And so I found the 2018 biennial review, and I was like, this is awesome. And yeah, one of the things in it was continue to like promote and grow the CRC CRP, including having a professional staff position, which is also huge. Like, this doesn't happen easily. So if any and all of you have been involved in like growing this group and advocating for this, thank you, and I'm excited. Yes. So I wanted to talk a little bit about like a purpose statement, because something that I've tried to explain is like, or something that I've started to conceptualize as my professional career continues is like, it's not really enough to say like, I'm here to serve students. Like, you have to ask yourself why a lot, whether that's like in the context of doing admin stuff, which I loathe. I'm kind of like, why? Or like, how does this contribute to like why I actually want to be here doing this? And so I asked myself, like, why do I want to do this? So I have a few of these purpose statements, and the first one is to empower students to find meaning and belonging so that they can know that they deserve recovery and the benefits that follow. and to change the dominant paradigm around the right way to be recovered so that students can choose a path of recovery that is aligned with their identities, backgrounds, and goals, and that will allow them to sustain their recovery. That was very wordy. And these are social media posts that I made for Ram Recovery, and so I had a really good time just Googling like inspirational recovery quotes. But yeah, I wanted to include this to kind of wrap up like, why are you even here? But hopefully you can tell by my excitedness that like I love this stuff. I have no idea how long I took.
You're great. Yep, you're almost perfectly
Sweet.
like 25 minutes. So
Yes.
that means we have some time if people have questions or anecdotes or anything else. Or I imagine also if there are questions for the group that I know you asked them earlier. But
I was going to say
yeah.
that it might be a good idea, she may have met all of you, I don't know,
Yeah.
but it might be a good idea to introduce.
That's a great idea. Yeah, we'll just do quick introductions so
Okay,
we know who's in the room,
Yeah.
where we're from.
Yeah, so I'm Elizabeth Kennedy, I'm a violence prevention specialist, so I interact with this role as part of the prevention and wellness team.
Right, but Amy Fraser, Interim Director for Prevention and Wellness.
And I'm Jerry Frank, I'm work coordination, asset inventory manager for housing and dining, and also a person of long-term recovery.
And on the board since
And on the
since
advisory.
the first day,
Mm-hmm.
since I was here. Yeah, Sarah. I don't actually think I explained my job at all. I just explained that I was on the board. So I'm the student engagement specialist. I oversee our peer health educators and our student health advisory board and kind of all the ways that we try to elevate and bring student voice into our work at student health services.
I'm losing my voice. It's not good. But I, like Amy mentioned, I would hope to see ABC here. So we'll probably be doing a lot of that.
Cool.
Hi, I'm Nicole Hines. I work sort of next door at the Human Services Resource Center, which is an office on campus that helps homeless, low-income, or food insecure students. I really like to do my work from like a really like trauma-informed, super justice, super inclusive kind of place. And like Amy and I have overlapping philosophies, which is great.
And right next door, which is just
Yes,
all the ways that
yeah.
it kind of encompass us. So yeah, thanks Jerry for asking us to do that. People probably read your resume, so I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to share about you or like your background. I think probably. Yeah.
Should
Or
I
we
sit
can
down?
just get into questions. Yeah, you can. And I'm gonna shut this door.
Thank you for listening to me. Just go off.
Okay, so I'm like watching this really good presentation, thinking that like you might want to come outside of me, and I'm really impressed with your work. It's clear you're like relational, trauma-informed role. Tell me about trauma stewardship for you. Like, how do you take care of like your own stuff so you can help other people take care of their stuff?
Yes, that's an amazing question. So I play roller derby. And so like within the like a month of getting sober, I started derby, which has helped me a fuck ton. And so that helps me take care of myself. That's not like a real answer. So that's tricky because like when I think about like self-care, something that I tell my students is like sometimes you just don't have time, and so sometimes that's even like difficult to role model. And so when I think about how do I take care of myself, at one point I sat down and was like, every day I need to do something recovery supportive, and it's just for myself, because I think like sometimes doing this work is like, oh yeah, it contributes to like my sobriety too, but I'm like, no, what are you doing for you? And so like exercise is a big piece, going to derby, like hitting my friends is a big piece. I for a long time I told myself I was an internal processor, but I don't actually think that's true. And so yeah, having someone to process with, usually after I've kind of like cooked on whatever is happening, and also being able to like explain what I need, which was like a difficult lesson, is like I'm good at wallowing, yeah, but sometimes it's like, what do I actually need? And so I have to like ask myself that, and then I also have to be able to like ask for help, and so sometimes that's like calling my mom or my sister and being like, I don't want your advice, I just need you to like listen to me. So yeah, being able to name my needs, going to Derby even when I don't really want to, because it's always so fun. Yeah, having like a solid support network and being able to say like, this is what I need from you. And also like, I don't know if this is, hopefully this doesn't come across as like a sucking up type of answer, but also like compartmentalizing in like in a way that, again, I kind of talked about like, it's important that students have control of their story. And so like, even if I need to process with someone, it's important that it's coming from like, how can I talk to you to kind of like, better support the student if I'm kind of lost by something, or if I feel like I might not be the best person for the student to be connected with right now, like who can I refer them to? How can I make sure that I'm serving them the best based on also like where I'm at? That's a good question.
Just have a really general
Yeah.
question. I think I probably have some good guesses, but I would just like to hear
Uh-huh.
because that's better than my guess.
Uh-huh.
What excites you most about this position?
Mm-hmm.
Why'd you apply?
Yeah. So I'm at an interesting intersection of life, and I mostly mean this like career-wise. So like housing is a really cool, just like generalized sort of place to be. So like on any particular day, I'm focused on like facilities issues, or like a roommate conflict, or days where it's like just conduct or crisis. And so like that was fun, and I still love my job so much. But I think, especially I got back from the ARHE conference in July, and I was like, why am I trying to do both? I was like, if I really give a lot of time and energy and like working in collegiate recovery makes me feel good, why don't I want to like do that all the time? And so I was like, I think I need to try this. And so so I guess the crossroads I'm describing is like, I'm very happy with my life now, but I also kind of like, how do I up that a little bit? And I think I found something from like, I don't remember what entity on campus it was, but it kind of talked about like who are the like partner institutions of OSU, or who are the kind of like ones to look at that are like doing the same type of stuff, and CSU was one of them. And so like the other place that I'm at is like, I really love CSU too, and so I was kind of looking for like, are there institutions that I think I have a solid context or foundation for, and I think would kind of like see what I've been trying to advocate for at CSU already. So yeah, I'm like envious and excited of like where the community here is at, and I think I see this like institution type and sort of like set up within the health network as a really solid like foundation to, not to start, but to kind of like build on what already exists. Yeah, and I feel like this will make me want to get up in the morning, which sounds kind of morbid, and it's not like now I don't want to get up in the morning, but being a live-in staff member is such a bizarre thing. And I'm kind of ready to be out of that too, but I feel like I will actually be very motivated to like get up, start that coffee, drive to work, instead of being like 5 more minutes, and then I just like roll to my office. Yeah, that's a good question.
There's coffee here.
Yes.
So pick up off that question.
Yeah.
So if we have, it's what sounds like an innovative kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
and it sounds like you've been like trying to get some more buy-in or whatnot at CSU.
Mm-hmm.
I also do innovative work.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'm talking with administrators and speaking a language they don't understand. Like in particular, some of the abstinence stuff is just like,
Huh?
wait, this is a best practice? Are you kidding me? No, it always happens. Yeah. Anyway, so how do you work with folks who might have a different framework of what is best, and how do you
Yes.
kind of go by in with those folks?
Yes. I think patience is important, and I think that is something I guess in undergrad, I would have identified as like a student activist, where I kind of like didn't think about like what would be a good logical sort of like step. I was just kind of like, we want change right now. And little did I know I would like go into higher education and then kind of be part of the very slow changes that happen. And so I think keeping in mind that like nothing happens quickly. And I think that this community started in like 2012 or 13. And I'm like, this is where you're at, and it's 2018, which is like, that's still huge. And I don't want to like say like, oh, that took a long time, Sarah. Geez, what have you been doing?
I was only there for 1 year. I do know the person who used to run this, so I'll call him and blame her.
Okay, cool. So like, yeah, being patient is important, and I think like I've also, I don't know. I think I am not easily discouraged, which I don't know if that's a character thing that has always happened, or if it's something that's recent, where it's like if I feel strongly enough about something, you can't really talk me out of it, or like make me feel dumb for having dreams. So yeah, I think like patience is important, specifically for like the stigma type stuff, where it's like people don't know that they sound like such asshats, but you have to like patiently try to kind of like change the message, and again kind of reiterate like students in recovery are an asset to campus, like this isn't a threat to you or to your learning environment, and so like kind of being able to talk about those in nuanced ways that like keep the conversation going versus being like no, which is satisfying in the moment but like doesn't do much in terms of like building a relationship and having the dialogue be sort of ongoing. So yeah, perseverance, patience. Yeah. That's a good question. And I think it's also a little bit situational, where even though I talk about like this is what I would do if someone tried to sort of question this, I think I would still be able to do the things that I'm saying, but it would also probably, it would be frustrating. Yeah, but it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. We've already talked about like pushing rocks up hills, so.
Yeah.
So much though.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Hopefully before this goes. So one of my focus points, one of my primary interests is about being able to network and expand opportunities for students, minority students who are not considered traditional students and who often are kind of like you were mentioning invisible identities, even though there's a lot of characteristics that are not considered invisible.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you plan to do, or what are some of your ideas that you have to help expand the community to the non-dominant culture?
I feel like this is a very obvious answer, and again, it's kind of something that I can talk about in the theoretical, but like what it will look like in real life is kind of like we'll see. But like reaching out to the identity centers on campus and kind of saying like, so this kind of goes along with some of the other questions that we talked about earlier, is like there's nuance to like people in recovery that aren't like white, straight dudes. And I think specifically like many of the folks in the collegiate recovery community at CSU are queer identified people, and like how does that sort of like inform the space or their experience like on campus and beyond. And so when I think about like how will we reach those folks, I think like relationship building is a big part of it, and something that I kind of struggle with is like how do you kind of balance like wanting folks with marginalized identities to like be able to tell their story in addition to like educating myself on like being able to support those students whether I know their story or not, but like understanding kind of like how their identities will
Play a role in
Yes.
how they have an impact in cultural.
Totally, yep. Yeah, so it's kind of like a we'll see type of thing, but also like I know I myself and the community will probably need to like be actively working on like what it will look like for the community to be inclusive. We don't know what that will look like.
You also, so I don't want something that Amy shared in the interview questions, also, I think you made a really important point too about not competing for, like, so acknowledging if students actually feel like they're getting the support they need in a cultural resource center or somewhere else on campus to support that in the way that you can. So I think that was also, to me, that like ties into that answer and is a really important point too, like where students find support.
Yep. And we talk about that a lot in university housing at CSU too, is like there are gonna be students in the floor communities that like don't wanna go to programs, don't wanna talk to their RA, but it might be because they have community outside of the hall and like you don't need to fight that. So I think that's kind of a similar point of like if they are finding community in other places, then we don't need to kind of say like, but what about over here? It's like, yes, please do that. Like how can we, even if they wanna like come to meetings every once in a while, but they, have their main folks somewhere else, like that's, and we will celebrate that versus like wanting to take them.
About 5 minutes left if there are other questions. Any questions that you want to ask?
I don't know if I wrote any one of them. I need them down for this part. But in terms of like the like level of collaboration or kind of like communication streams, that's a weird word that I'm using. Is the campus culture pretty open to kind of like cold calling or outreaches? And I think part of it, I guess it's two-sided, where it's like, are there things in place that ensure that like students are supported by like multiple entities? And then on the flip side, is it encouraged for employees to kind of like create that if needed? And I can provide an example if that would be helpful. So like CSU has like a student case management thing, and like they communicate with like everyone. So all of the Ingersoll residents, I'm in their support network. I use air quotes because like on the sort of advising website, it just says like Amy Gooch under their support network. And so we're always kept in the loop if a student or if an instructor notices they're absent, or if they like express suicidal ideations or something, like we're also notified of those things. So like what is the level of that kind of hands-on? Everybody's looking at each other.
Yeah, I feel like, so I sit in the Office of Student Life on a subgroup called the Care Alignment Team, which is different than the Care Team.
Care Alignment.
Yeah. And to be perfectly honest with you, no. There are some ways that you can get skilled with certain things like our core database to kind of like be able to see a little bit of a snapshot of where students are plugged into or if they're not. But the kind of like highly communicative alert system you're talking about sounds amazing.
I know,
It's
like,
really
what?
Notes.
How do we bring that here? We have a really strong cultural value of confidentiality and really not sharing information unless it is absolutely pertinent. There were some data breaches a couple of years back that really kind of set a cultural norm here that sometimes is honestly challenging. But on the other side of that are, kind of these networks of people who are pretty plugged into each other. So I call Amy pretty regularly. Like you kind of, when you're doing this kind of quote unquote helper work, you kind of learn who your people are and then you kind of do that sort of thing. And everybody knows that and you get plugged in pretty quickly to who that is. And it sort of works in the best way that it can.
We're pretty resourceful, we can kind of figure it out, but there's not a great like streamlined system by any means. I will also say, I think maybe we will get there, and there are things that help, like, I'm mindful when you were talking about case managers, the HSRC this year just hired a case manager, so, I think there's probably a lot of intersections, and I think Nicole was very effective in saying, like, when you know who to reach out to, we can kind of make our own networks, but I think we're probably all pretty jealous of a system that's very easily navigable.
And
like on a student basis, like we don't really have that, but what I will say is that what's really great about this campus is there's a lot of folks who, like, if you're thinking of a thing, you can reach out and be like, hey, can we work together to accomplish this thing or create this structure or program or whatnot? And there's a lot of young professionals on campus that are like, yeah, let's do this, let's kind of change this in this way, shape, or form. And so that feels really exciting.
I think that for recovery specifically, I think with our, I'm sure that maybe you can answer this somewhat, but with our in-house, so in-house and within student health services, there's more connection with counseling and psychological services and folks who attend like Smart Recovery or who are showing up, you know, for counseling appointments. Like they will refer those students, but they're not gonna like give you a list of like, hey, these students should be on your radar or something.
Okay.
So there's definitely still that confidentiality in terms of recovery, but because the two substance use counselors work within student health services, and there is the opportunity for and exists that there's like some more internal connection there. But yeah, the CAPS piece is kind of, they certainly know about us. One of them sometimes is on the advisory board, and it's very confidential and separate. Like,
And kind of to add on to that too, the understanding that not all of the members of the CRC are going to be coming through our services, but that there are some who do, and that we are responsible for coordinating their care.
Yeah.
For me, I won't tell you like who I'm referring, but in instances where I do refer individuals to apply for membership to CRC, I, like with Jay, a heads up, hey, I have 2 individuals I just referred to CRC, check to see if they apply for their membership. That way you know that there are students that have been encouraged, but I can't give identifying information confidentiality, but it's cool.
Okay, so I'm mindful of our time. If people want to stay so firm, 2 to 3 is kind of just an open forum. We can do tours and so if people have more questions or want to, you're welcome to. Otherwise, if you want to leave any feedback forms, I have any help those.
You mind if I take it and bring it back tomorrow?
I don't mind at all.
Yeah.
That's really kind of, yep, that was fine. Thank you.
Amy,
Thank you, Amy.
it was so nice to meet you too. Thank you for your time. Yeah, totally. I hope your voice feels good.